Hey, this is Parker. I'm here to show you a few examples of what I call business software middleware. And what we mean by that is a functionality that's repeated across a wide array of products in Rippling that we've built sort of componentized central versions of that we can then reuse across all these different products. Another company might call something like this platform capabilities. We call it middleware. And two things that are important about what I'm going to show you, or two things I'm going to hope to convince you. One is that the specific components that we built here are really good as standalone products. They're powerful, configurable. They create jaw-dropping customer experiences. And they do that in large part because of how integrated they are with employee data in Rippling. And the second thing I want to show you is how we're able to take these components, these pieces of middleware, and use them as Lego blocks to assemble new products and applications inside of Rippling. And that's really important because as a compound company, what that lets us do is build better products more quickly and with less underlying engineering investment. So before we get to that part of the demo, though, I want to kind of orient you quickly here. This is my Rippling account. So this is where I go to hire someone. This is where I can click to sign in to various different services that I've connected up to Rippling. And down here, I can go here to run payroll, to manage benefits for my company. And you'll notice that there are a bunch of apps that we have installed for our company. And some of these apps are Rippling utilities in yellow and purple. But there are also a bunch of third-party apps that we have installed as well. And what it means for one of these third-party apps to be installed is that Rippling is managing the employee and user data inside of that application. So when I hire someone in Rippling, I'm going to specify up front their start date, department, employment type, work location, compensation, that sort of thing. And on the basis of those attributes, and some of the specific ways that I've configured each of these individual applications, Rippling knows if that new employee should get access to G Suite, to Slack, to GitHub, to Zendesk, to Salesforce, based on their role within the company. And it's going to get them access to all of the right systems. But then we go a level deeper than that. So we're also going to add them to all of the right email lists in the company based on their role, all of the right Slack channels. We're going to set up the right spending limit on their corporate card. And we're going to add them to all of the right license types, roles, policies, groups. There are different words for this in each of these different applications, but basically get them configured within each of these apps correctly based on their role within Rippling. And then, of course, at some point, we're going to revoke their access everywhere all at once. So now to talk a little bit about middleware, the first thing I want to show you is reports in Rippling. Now, most business software apps will end up building at some point some concept of a report, but almost everyone does it wrong because what they do is they build canned reports because clients come to them and say, look, we need a report for X and Y, and so they build X and Y. And the problem with that is there's this kind of infinitely deep well of customer wants and needs around reporting that can really never be solved for with canned reports. You've got to build a custom reporting system that lets clients get exactly what they need right when they need it. And that's the approach that we've taken. So I'm going to skip ahead here quickly and show you a new type of report that's not launched yet that I think is good to sort of illustrate some of our capabilities. I can add really sort of any type of data in Rippling that I want to this report, from information about an employee as an individual, their job and role within the company, their compensation, information about their insurance benefits, about the computer that they're using at work. We can bring in stuff that we're pulling in from a background check system, from your performance management system. And then this is weird. You can bring in pull request data from GitHub. So this isn't launched yet, but we are starting to bring in all of the third-party object data from all of the different third-party apps that you have installed in Rippling into Rippling so that you can use it and manipulate it inside of reports and workflow and other tools inside of Rippling. And you can think of this as an employee-centric ETL. And one question is like, why? Like, why would someone want to look at pull request data in Rippling? And the answer goes back to this idea that I spoke about in the memo, which is that when you take third-party object data, when you take data that you want to report on in your company and you join it to the employee record, there's a lot of interesting things that you can do. And so in this case, it turns out that if you're an engineering manager, there's no way for you to create a report in GitHub of all of the open pull requests for your team, because GitHub has no idea who's on your team. But it turns out that report is trivially easy for someone to produce in Rippling. Similarly, every engineering organization that I've ever been a part of ends up building this custom workflow so that when a pull request fails in your CI tool, there's an alert that's sent to the engineer, the author of that pull request, in Slack. And you need to build this in custom software because GitHub and Slack have incompatible systems of identity. In GitHub, someone's username might be, codeguy37, and in Rippling, it's their first name dot last name at company.com. Rippling, though, it turns out, is in this unique position where we understand that there's this employee, and this employee has the following GitHub handle and the following Slack username. And so that means that we can disambiguate identity across business systems so that you can build workflow in Rippling without having to write any custom code so that when a pull request fails in your CI tool, there's an alert that's sent to that specific engineer in Slack, or because Rippling understands relationships between roles, we can route that alert to that employee's manager or the VP of their department or all of the peers on their team, for example. So one way of actually kind of re-articulating what it is that we do at Rippling is I've spent a lot of time looking at the data schemas for different types of business software. And one thing I've noticed is that almost every piece of business software has this dim table for the employee record. If you look at a GitHub pull request is going to have an author. It's going to have a reviewer, someone who merged it, and each of those people are employees at your company. A Zendesk ticket is going to have an agent that worked that ticket. An expense item in your expense system is going to have an employee that spent money, and usually one or more employees that approved a reimbursement. I'm convinced that as a result, the employee dim table ends up being this central node that allows you to construct this larger unified meta schema across all of business software. And once you create a unified meta schema, a unified schema, there's a lot of really cool things that you can do, which I'm going to show you about in just a second. But first, to sort of illustrate some of what you can do here, I'm going to start and add, maybe some information about tickets in Zendesk. So I'll add, the data ticket was created and last updated, and the assignee, which is the employee on that ticket. And I might add some information from our time and attendance system, maybe the total hours worked in a shift, the date of the shift. And then I'm going to add, the check date for a pay period, and I don't know, maybe something crazy like medical deductions, employer contributions to someone's medical insurance from payroll. And so I've got a bunch of data from very different data sets here. I'm going to click continue, and Rippling is automatically going to default to a certain set of merge criteria. So, most people don't even have to review this and go over it, but it's sort of decided on a way to sort of merge all this data together and how to sort of show it to you. This is still not launched yet, so forgive the error there. But these are merge criteria that you can go in, join criteria that you can go in and edit if you want it to work in a different way. And then you can continue on to sort of create a report. I'm going to show you a slightly different, I'm going to skip ahead here though and show you a slightly different type of report in Rippling, which is a payroll report. And a payroll report has multiple rows per employee. Each row is a separate pay period. So it's great for looking at, of course, payroll data. And I'm going to add a few things here. We're going to start with SDI withholdings, which is a type of payroll tax in California. I'm going to add sales commissions. Remember, each row is a separate pay period, so I'm going to add the check date for each of those pay periods, which is the date that employees get paid. And I'm going to add everyone's department as well. And you can see that this is kind of a data dump right here. It's not that useful in its current form, but I can start to manipulate this. I can go in and filter this by work location. Let's exclude our Bangalore and our Toronto offices. Maybe look at 12 months of data instead of 3. And if you remember, I added this check date field to this report. I'm going to create a time series out of this report by grouping everything by check date, by dragging it down here. And that's going to create, you'll see there's 2 separate check dates in October, and that's not really what I want. So I'm going to bucket this by year and month instead of by date to create monthly buckets. And then I'm also going to group it by department. So I have buckets by month and then by department. And I'm going to sum it up to get totals for these fields across month and department, and then run the report because I've been working with a limited set of data to make it performant. And now that I've got all the data in there, I can throw in a chart that shows me, in this case, SDI withholdings by department over time. And you can see that there's this discontinuity in January that happens because SDI withholdings are capped at a certain amount of payroll, and the cap resets in January. And so, you can see as we're hiring people, it's continuing to grow over the course of the year, but sort of turning a corner now in August. And so this, you can sort of see how you can use this system to get from very raw data to any specific view or set of insights that you're looking for about your organization in Rippling. I want to show you one other thing in reports, but before I do that, I need to go back to the raw data here. Let me see if I can find someone in here with commissions. So you can see the commissions data in Rippling is a little bit noisy. People don't get paid commissions every pay period. The amount of the commissions bounces around a little bit. And so as a result, when I'm looking at commissions data, I like to smooth out some of the noise by looking at a backward-looking rolling 90-day sum. So I can do this in Rippling by creating a calculated field. This is not launched yet. This is coming in a few months inside of Rippling. But we're launching in a few months a scripting language inside of Rippling that we call RQL. And you can use RQL in a lot of different places across Rippling. Inside of a report, I can use RQL to create these formula fields, and we'll talk about some of the other use cases in a second. So I'm going to call this rolling 90 commissions. And if you remember, this report is unique by employee and pay period. And so for every employee and pay period, I want to find all of the other rows in the report that are, first of all, for the same employee, and second of all, where the check date is within the last 90 days. And then I'm going to take the commission fields on each of those rows, and I'm going to sum them all up. And so I can write this out here by saying sum, then I'm going to select from, in this case, the data set is all rows in the report, and I'm going to choose this commission field. And you'll notice, as an aside, that we support a lot of functions that would be familiar to sort of any advanced Excel user, but there are also some ones that are very specific to working with data about organizations. So one of them is this function we call the org function that takes as its arguments an employee and a relationship, and it returns an array of employees that match the specified relationship to that employee. So you can call org of employee manager, director, VP, IT, finance, HR, to get the people with those relationships to the employee, or org of employee -2 to get everyone 2 levels down in the org chart from them. Here, though, I'm going to select these rows where employee is equal to $employee, which basically means only take rows where the employee is the same as the employee in the row that I'm looking at and calculating this for. And check date is less than or equal to today's check date. And check date is greater than today's check date minus 90. So if I haven't screwed that up, which is a distinct possibility, and I hit continue, and then I can add this to the report, and drum roll, hopefully this works. And if I find someone who has commissions, and unfortunately no one in the preview has commissions, so let me quickly filter the department down to maybe the sales department. And now you can see that if I find someone who has commissions here, it is in fact calculating a rolling 90-day sum of those commissions. So you can use RQL in a lot of other places across Rippling. One thing that you can do is remember that Rippling controls systems access and configuration for all the different third-party apps that you have connected up to us. And you can write out the rules for that systems access and configuration using RQL. So maybe you want everyone in the engineering department to get access to AWS, but maybe you actually want to do something much more subtle or sophisticated than that, which is you want to say, look, I want everyone in the engineering department who is either above a certain level or has more than a certain amount of tenure, and in any event who has an active hardware security key live on their Rippling account, and don't provision their access to AWS until that expression becomes true. You could write out RQL expressions to describe the spending limit on someone's corporate card. You could create an email list inside of G Suite where the membership of the email list was every employee where count of org of employee -1 is greater than 2. And it's an email list for managers, but specifically for managers with more than 2 direct reports that will always be updated and maintained as your org chart and your organization evolves. And then second, remember that all of the data that we're pulling in from these third-party business systems, all of that can be inputs to RQL expressions, which means that things that change in another business system outside of Rippling can precipitate changes inside of Rippling through RQL, or even because we control systems access and configuration in other business systems, changes in one business system over here can lead to changes in another business system over there, sort of all riding the rails of this single unified schema with the employee record at its center. And then lastly, I'm really looking forward to using RQL to extend my data model. So in Rippling, I'm going to create a new calculated field that's going to show up on every time card for every hourly employee in the company. That's basically a simple ratio of the number of Zendesk tickets that employee closed in a pay period divided by the number of hours that they worked in a pay period. And it's a very rough measure of efficiency that'll show up whenever a manager is approving overtime in Rippling. But it's something that's impossible to calculate in Zendesk because Zendesk has no idea how many hours someone worked or what their pay schedule is. But when you take Zendesk ticket data and you join it to the employee object, then transitively you're joining it to everything else as well, including time and attendance data. And so once you create this single schema, you can calculate that ratio as just by typing X divided by Y. So I'm going to jump out of reports now and show you another piece of middleware that is launching soon, which is our workflow system. And you can think of workflow and rippling as sort of like Zapier or if this then that. It allows you to specify a set of triggers or conditions in rippling, which when they become true, will lead to downstream automated systems actions. One neat thing about this is actually everything here is built on top of RQL. So everything I'm going to show you is just generating a set of RQL expressions that are transmitted to the back end for evaluation. So we start by showing you this object model graph of all of the data in rippling for your company. So you have different first-class objects, things like employees or devices, computers, pay runs, including stuff you're pulling in from third-party systems like GitHub pull requests, Jira issues. And if I start on the employee, we show you some common conditions, like an employee starts work, signs their offer letter. But you can also access all of the data about employees that you have in rippling, from information about them as an individual to information about their compensation. And so I can say, look, I want to trigger something based on someone's target annual bonus. And I want this to trigger if their target annual bonus changes to a value greater than $20,000. And I want this to fire as soon as the system knows that the change has been fully approved, not when it goes into effect. And if I were to add this condition, I could then specify a set of actions, which could include email alerts, Slack alerts, API calls to third-party business systems. You can even, if you set this to trigger when the change is initiated, you could even use this to rewrite the approval requirements of the system and say, look, if someone's going to get a bonus of this magnitude, you actually need to reach out to finance and get their approval before sending this change through. If the bonus is less than $20,000, then finance doesn't have to be involved. And in this example, I started on the employee object, but I could have also started somewhere else, like on a device. Maybe if I'm an IT guy, Rippling has device management software that manages policies and configuration, security, software installation on your fleet of employee laptops. And one thing that I might care about is the last ping time on these machines, because if a computer hasn't pinged in a while, it might indicate something's wrong. And so I can say I want an alert if the last ping time is before 7 days ago, and I can add that as a condition. And now, maybe that's too broad. Maybe I'm going to get pinged too much on this. And so I want to filter it down or narrow it a little bit. And to do that, I can add a filtering condition here. And for reasons that should be intuitive, when I add this condition, I'm going to have to start on the device object, the same object I started on before. And so I can pull in another attribute of this device, maybe something about the operating system. I only care about Macs versus PCs, to sort of filter down these triggers. But remember that the thing that's really unique about Rippling is that employee data, that the device data is joined back to the employee data, which means that Rippling understands that every computer has an employee that it's assigned to. And if I click onto that, I'm now back on, I've navigated now over to this employee object. And I can pull in any attribute of the employee that this device belongs to as a filtering condition on this trigger that's like fundamentally about a computer, including something silly like what their target annual bonus is. But more sensibly, maybe there's something about the employee that makes them higher risk. Maybe they work on the infrastructure engineering team, they're an executive. Maybe I just want to check and make sure that they're not out on PTO, for example, and bring that into the equation. Or maybe there's something about me as someone who works in IT. Maybe I'm only responsible for a particular work location or a particular department. And so I want to make sure I'm only interested in these alerts if the department is engineering, for example, and I can add that as a condition. So generally speaking, Rippling's workflow system has 3 very specific advantages over other sort of standalone workflow systems that companies might use or implement. And the first is that Rippling has an understanding of cross-system identity. So that means that a condition that evaluates to true in one business system can trigger an action against that same employee in a completely unrelated business system. And second, because we understand, or related to this, because we understand relationships between roles, it can trigger or take action against not just that employee, but relatives of that employee, their manager, the VP of their department, their peers, so on and so forth. The second thing about Rippling's workflow system that's important is that it understands the data model of organizations. It understands that you have employees and devices and pay runs, and it knows how those things are related to one another, and sort of you have this kind of object graph that you can navigate across all of these different objects to sort of traverse from one to the other. And the third thing is that Rippling understands the dimensional values for your company. We know what your departments are, what your work locations are, your employment types are, who all of your employees are, who their managers are. And because of that, you can take this understanding for granted as you're building out workflow. And because of these 3 things, I think you can build workflows in Rippling that are just much more powerful in terms of what they can accomplish inside of Rippling in comparison to what you can build in sort of really any standalone system. So I'm going to switch gears here now and show you one of the applications that we built fairly recently in Rippling, which is our time and attendance system. And our time and attendance product launched in February, and it was the first product that we built on top of this concept of middleware. And that has some important implications. One of them is that when you think about what's important to people that buy time and attendance software, one thing that's really important to them is concepts like reports. They want great reports in software like this. And the engineering team that built this product never had to build the concept of a report in Rippling. All they had to do is make sure that their data was stored in Rippling in just the right way. And immediately on day one, they had reporting capabilities that knock the pants off of every standalone third-party TNA system on the market. The second thing that's really important for buyers of TNA software are policies for things like overtime. And like a lot of other standalone TNA systems, we have built-in canned policies for overtime state by state. So I have them here for California, Arizona, for all the different places where we have employees working. But in Rippling, you can also create custom policies. And when you create a custom policy, you build these custom policies on top of the workflow engine that I was just showing you earlier. Except in this case, the actions, instead of being things like alerts or approval requirements, the actions are applying a pay rate, overtime or double overtime, clocking someone out. And the conditions, instead of being someone's annual bonus, the conditions are things like if the employee works on weekends or company holidays or certain days in a week at certain hours of the day, or if they work more than a certain number of hours over some threshold, either consecutively or in some rolling period of time. And across all these different conditions, you can assemble a set of rules to build really any conceivable policy for overtime that will work across any geography or jurisdiction for any company or industry. And the kicker on all this, the thing that I think is just really cool, is if I click into one of these canned policies for like California overtime, you can see that California overtime, or the system-generated policy, is actually implemented on top of the custom policy engine, which means that as a client, I can go in here and I can see and read and understand what the business logic of the system is for California overtime. And importantly, I can edit it or delete it or rewrite it for my own purposes. if I need to. And the same thing's true with alerts, that you can create, highly customized alerts inside of Rippling TNA for sort of almost any conceivable condition that can arise inside of a TNA system. So what this is leading towards is that Rippling has been a multi-product company since the day it was founded. It's one of the things that really makes the company unique. And that is very counter to the conventional wisdom on how people say you're supposed to do these things, which is that you're supposed to focus on one extremely narrow thing, which is advice that I happen to think is wrong for this specific company, and maybe wrong much more broadly than that. It's definitely true that being a multi-product company is hard, though. It's just that we've now reached a point where I think that we are decently good at it. And it has become a competitive advantage for the company. And so we are now doubling down on this strategy and plan to spin up one new product and engineering team every quarter going forward. And so the first that we did this with was TNA software. The next one was learning management. We're working on spend management now. After that, there are a series of other products. And there are a few others after that. But each of these products are built on this same set of middleware Lego blocks. And when you think about, what do you need to build a spend management system? Well, you need great concepts of policies for who's allowed to spend money in your organization under what circumstances. And you want those policies to be applied based on someone's role within the company. And you need good concepts of approvals and workflow so that you can specify when is approval required, by whom, when is approval not required, when is it required by more than one person. And you want these approval requirements, they depend on someone's role in the company, and you want them to be routed to individuals based on relationships between roles in the company. And you need great concepts of reports and alerts because you want to be able to see who's spending money, how it tracks to your budget, where it's all going. And you want every manager in the company to be able to see that. And for managers to see this for their organization, you have to understand that, money was spent by a particular person, and that person belongs to the organization that manager is responsible for. And so, even that is sort of inseparable from these concepts like role. And there are also a few other things that we need to build, but a lot of what we have, or a lot of what we need for this product is already there inside of Rippling. And so, look, generally speaking, this is not supposed to work. What's supposed to work is building extremely narrow, best-in-breed products that people call, that we call point SaaS software. And so it's worth talking about why we think this approach to building products works. And generally speaking, there are 4 reasons. And the secret to this is that it's the same 4 reasons across every product that we build. First, all of the products that we build in this way are much more deeply integrated with the employee record. And it turns out that unlocks on its own enormous product capability across a wide array of business software. The second is that because these products are built on this set of middleware Lego blocks, it means that we can afford to invest in these capabilities much more deeply than standalone point SaaS competitors can. When our competitors build reports, they kind of add it as an afterthought. For us, we can go 100x deeper on that concept. And so for these specific capabilities, which happen to be the ones that I think buyers are often, these are often the things that they care the most about. That's an area that we can really, really shine and win. For clients, there are common UX patterns. If you take the time to learn how to create a report, to set up workflow in Rippling, if God forbid you take the time to learn RQL, you are now going to have superpowers that apply for any product that you buy through us that do not work for you when you buy standalone third-party software. And lastly, there's this common sales and marketing system and these pricing advantages that come with bundling. And the best way to understand that is to sort of see how it works against us. One of the reasons we built our TNA product is we used to go up against other competitors that had built-in TNA. And when we did that, clients would come to us, even though we would encourage them to buy best in breed TNA software, standalone third-party software, clients would come to us and say, yeah, but the TNA software in this competing with this competing company is only $4 PEPM. And Rippling, you guys are sending me out to T-Sheets, and that product is $12. And so as a result, there's a hidden $8 PEPM penalty for me for going with Rippling. And look, we can close that gap by building our own TNA product, but then we can extend it in the other direction with our future roadmap. So, a year from now, maybe we go to that same or a similar prospect and we can say, look, you were really interested in and software and Rippling. And sure, you could go with that other competitor, but then you'd have to buy which is, and those products in Rippling are, and so it gets really expensive for companies to assemble this set of point SaaS systems to round out other companies' offerings as we start to offer more and more things in our bundle. And now, look, I'm actually convinced that this dynamic on its own is going to lead to a wave of rebundling in business software. Because if you look at how people bought business software 15 years ago, everyone bought software from the same small set of megopoly business vendors. Companies like SAP and Oracle and Salesforce. And it was really this shift to the cloud that created what I think is going to prove to be an ephemeral moment in time opportunity for companies to come along and peel off specific features and functionality and turn those features into standalone SaaS companies. But as sort of some of these new delivery mechanisms, as cloud and mobile and things like that, as those technologies mature, as they take firmer root, then I think the overwhelming advantages of deep systems integration and bundled contracting and pricing are going to come to redominate. And a new wave of mega vendors is going to emerge. And one of these companies very clearly is Salesforce. And I think that Rippling is another. And there are analogies, interestingly, between all of the sort of yellow bricks that I've described here in Rippling and the sort of set of tools that exist in Salesforce's product. It's just that, I think of Salesforce really not as a CRM system. It's really a system for managing business process and workflow, which happens to be built on an underlying foundation of customer data, which creates this interesting analogy with Rippling because I think that there exists within companies an entirely separate set of business process and workflow that requires a very similar set of tooling to what you find in Salesforce. It's just that it needs that tooling to be built on a different underlying primitive. It needs it to be built on this more inwardly facing understanding of your company, your org, your employees, their job and role and function, and their relationships to one another, instead of the more outwardly facing understanding that Salesforce has of your customers and how leads and contacts relate to accounts. And don't get me wrong, there's a whole bunch of stuff that belongs in Salesforce's world. But these two things are just two sides of the same coin, the inwardly facing system and the outwardly facing system. And I think the bull case for Rippling is that there's every reason to believe that the other side of this coin would be every bit as large of an outcome as the one that you see with Salesforce.